This house is incredible, my sister-in-law exclaimed, inspecting every room with wide eyes. You're really calculating, aren't you? That's why you decided to inherit this place, she added with a sharp tone. After a thorough look around, Noel made a surprising statement. You've got good taste. We're inheriting this house, right? Isn't the inheritance already settled? I tried to clarify. There shouldn't be any issues. We've agreed to trade our current home for this one, I said firmly, hoping she understood. It was clear that debating with her was pointless, but I knew the moment would come when she would fully understand what I was truly capable of. I'm Remy, 28 years old and unmarried. I've been taking care of my ill grandmother while living in her house with my mother. My brother, Mark, is married, but he found it difficult to support our grandmother, so I took on the responsibility. My mother is also present, but she's older and struggles with caregiving, leaving me as the primary caretaker. When we were younger, our mother got divorced and worked tirelessly to raise us. As a result, my brother and I were mostly raised by our grandmother. I can't bring myself to abandon her after all she did for us. Plus, I'm single and have the flexibility to work from home. Noel, my brother's wife, doesn't seem particularly interested in caring for our family, so I'm the one who stepped up. Caregiving is demanding, but I continue because it's my way of expressing gratitude for everything my grandmother has done. My days spent with her are fulfilling, and I don't find it hard. However, what's been weighing on me lately is the attitude of my brother's wife. Mark acknowledges our grandmother's support and, although he can't help with her care, he visits regularly to check on her. But his wife's behavior during these visits is often irksome. Are you cleaning properly? Noel asked one day, inspecting the room. This place is a mess. You're relying on Grandma, so you'd better make sure you're doing your part. Noel has always been blunt, but from my perspective, her comments come off as rude and unpleasant. She often criticizes me with a sarcastic tone whenever she visits. I've tried to let a lot slide, but the word of freeloader stung. You're just living here for free, she remarked once, her voice dripping with condescension. Don't you think you have it easy staying here? It's true that I'm living in my grandmother's house, but I support myself. I don't receive any financial help from my brother, yet his wife accuses me of living an easy life while caring for my grandmother. It's frustrating to be criticized by someone who doesn't understand the challenges of working and caregiving at the same time. I'm earning my own living and haven't touched a penny of my grandmother's assets. Despite explaining this to Noel, she would brush me off and provoke me even more. Admit it, the reason you're caregiving is because you don't have to pay rent, right? Instead of relying on your parents, you're relying on Grandma, she taunted. The constant stress of dealing with Noel began to take a toll. I was exhausted every day, and I didn't have the energy to argue with her. I started to ignore her barbs, knowing they would only provoke a negative response. Then she'd say, "Oh, you're not responding. Does your silence mean you agree?" No matter how I reacted, Noel continued her barrage of hurtful remarks. Honestly, I wanted to ask Mark not to bring her along, but she's clever. She never says anything unpleasant when he's around, she saves it all for when it's just the two of us. As a result, my brother remained unaware of her behavior and continued to bring her to visit our grandmother. I tried to address it with him, but it only ended in him defending her. She wouldn't say something so cruel, would she? Are you picking on my wife? No one likes a troublesome sister-in-law. She's trying hard to get along with you, just be more friendly. Mark dismissed my concerns. He always took her side, making matters worse. Realizing there was no point in talking to him, I decided to avoid Noel as much as possible. With these feelings brewing, one day, my grandmother's condition worsened, and she needed to be hospitalized. Mark was busy with work and couldn't visit, so it was up to my mother and me to take care of her. My mother's health had been deteriorating from overwork, so it was difficult for her to go to the hospital every day. That left me as the one who went daily to look after my grandmother. After a month of this, my grandmother quietly passed away. It was sudden, but I had been prepared, knowing her condition was serious. Still, it was hard to accept her death, especially after all the time we'd spent together. In the midst of my grief, I informed my mother and brother. Then, unexpectedly, Noel showed up. Since Mark was tied up with work, she arrived first. Could it be that she actually cared about me during this difficult time? I couldn't believe it, considering how Noel had treated me in the past, but for a brief moment, I wondered if she might actually have some human decency. Grateful for her visit, I thanked her, but what she said next left me stunned. If you're going to grieve, do it quickly. Hurry up and finish the funeral and inheritance stuff, she said flatly. Your brother's busy with work. Don't make this more difficult for us. Instead of offering comfort or a kind word, she was fixated on the funeral and inheritance arrangements. Of course, this was typical of her. Once again, I was reminded of her cold and self-centered nature. Despite my grief, Noel continued pushing for things to be wrapped up quickly. While I appreciated that she came in place of my brother, I wasn't in the mood to be ordered around by her, especially considering she had distanced herself from our family until now. Though my irritation was boiling inside, I endured, not wanting to escalate things right after my grandmother's death. When Mark finally arrived, Noel fell silent for a moment, but once he was out of earshot, her usual sarcasm returned. As I struggled to come to terms with my grandmother's passing, her behavior infuriated me even more. To make matters worse, Noel had a knack for making insensitive remarks. Your grandmother sure lived a long time. Huh, did she use up all her savings? How much inheritance are we looking at? She asked, not even waiting for the funeral to be over. That was the breaking point for me. Is that really what you're thinking right after someone's death? Please, stop, I finally snapped. She seemed taken aback, but there are some things that shouldn't be said. Normally, Noel would argue back, but this time she just fell silent and walked away. Later, perhaps realizing she had gone too far, she kept her distance from me. Thankfully, the funeral went smoothly, and my emotions began to settle. Though the grief of losing my grandmother hadn't completely passed, I told myself that dwelling on the past wouldn't help. I began going through her belongings in the house we had shared. One day, my brother and his wife visited. I'll help sort through her things, Mark said. There was a lot to go through, so I appreciated his help. But as we worked, Noel seemed more interested in talking about money and the inheritance. While discussing the estate was inevitable, her focus on assets was disheartening. I didn't argue, but even Mark seemed confused by her attitude. As we sorted through things, it became clear that my grandmother had left behind her house and some savings. Noel quickly stated, "We'll take the money. This house isn't really suitable for us, so you should inherit it and take care of it." The house, which was showing signs of age, didn't seem valuable to her. It was clear she preferred the money. Mark seemed uncertain but ultimately agreed. Understanding their intentions, I calmly decided to inherit the house. As the conversation wrapped up and my brother and his wife prepared to leave, I thanked them for their help. Just as they were about to leave, Noel leaned in close with a smirk. Too bad all you got was this old house. At least I walked away with the cash. Was looking after your grandmother even worth it? Her words, laced with disdain, made her feelings toward me unmistakably clear. That day, I made a vow to myself, no matter what the future brought, I would never forgive her. In the months that followed, I continued living with my mother in the same house. Without my grandmother, it felt eerily quiet. One day, while my mother was away on a trip with friends, the house felt even more still. As dinner time approached, I was heading to the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I wondered who it could be. When I opened the door, there stood my brother's wife, standing alone. "Good evening. Is something wrong?" I asked, surprised to see her already stepping inside. "Hey, why didn't you tell me? This house is amazing," Noel exclaimed, inspecting the rooms as she walked in. "You really planned this, didn't you? You knew this would happen, that's why you chose to inherit the house." Her words were as sharp as ever. Maybe she was surprised by the transformation of my grandmother's house, and from that surprise, she directed her frustration toward me. After my grandmother's passing, I had decided to renovate the house. Recently, more and more people have been personalizing and updating old homes, and though I was a beginner, I was eager to try it myself. A friend in construction had helped me along the way, and together, we managed to turn the house into something that felt like home. This house, once my grandmother's, had become a place I cherished deeply. After inspecting the house, Noel made a surprising comment. "You've got great taste renovating it like this. We'll take this house as our inheritance." "Wasn't the inheritance already settled?" I replied. confusion creeping into my voice. I asked, struggling to understand what she was saying. Noel then replied with unwavering confidence. Listen, we've decided, we'll exchange our current house for this one. This house will be my husband's inheritance. You agree, right? She was pushing me, as usual. There shouldn't be any objections because it's an exchange. She insisted. We'll move in immediately. Pack up your things and leave as soon as possible. Her demands were relentless. As though she had lost all sense of reason, I tried to explain the facts about the inheritance, but it was clear she was ignoring them on purpose. Her determination was unyielding. No matter how much I tried to reason with her, she wouldn't budge. Realizing further conversation was futile, I decided to step back for the moment. Understood. I'll leave the house, I said, starting to gather my things. You've got it. Don't waste any time, she ordered, a smug smile spreading across her face as she saw me comply. Ignoring her, I pretended to pack my belongings and walk toward the garden shed. There, I grabbed the tools I had used for the renovation and returned to the house, where Noel was waiting. Seeing me holding the tools, she looked surprised, but quickly resumed her demands. You can deal with those tools later. Just clear the room for now. I understand. These tools are just for collecting my personal belongings, I responded, and then slammed the tools against the wall in the living room. Noel's expression shifted to one of confusion, but I paid her no mind. I started removing the wall materials, ignoring her shocked reaction. At that moment, Noel screamed. Wait, what are you doing? Stop, she yelled, panic creeping into her voice. I held the tool firmly and explained calmly. All the materials used for the renovations were paid for by me. They are my belongings, and I'm taking them with me. That's not what I meant. Stop this destruction, she continued, but she didn't approach me. Undeterred, I continued removing more of the wall components. Just as I was about to start on the floor, my brother arrived. I had called him as soon as I went out to retrieve the tools. What's going on? I heard shouting from outside, he asked, stepping into the room. Seeing the state of the living room, he was taken aback. What happened here? Noel quickly pointed at me. She's dangerous, she cried, tears streaming down her face. Given the situation, it was natural for Mark to be suspicious, but I stayed calm. She came in today and told me to leave the house, I explained. I didn't know the house had been renovated, and I can't accept that it was inherited in secret, Noel shouted indignantly. It's unfair. She should leave, and we should be the ones to live here. Listening to her contradictory statements, Mark's expression grew stern. We agreed that my sister would inherit the house, and we would receive the money as our inheritance, didn't we? He asked. Isn't this house rightfully my sister's? Cornered by his words, Noel became increasingly emotional. Why aren't you supporting me? She shouted. If you won't, I'll divorce you. Mark's response was measured but resolute. There's no point in continuing a marriage with someone who refuses to accept responsibility for their actions. Noel, taken aback by his calmness, fell silent. She had no retort. From that moment on, Mark took control of the situation. What if my sister thinks this is unfair? Mark continued. If we use the inheritance money for investments, and it increases in value, how will you explain that? No way. I won't concede, Noel said emotionally. We're the ones making the investments, and we haven't done anything wrong. Mark's voice softened. Do you really think that? What you're arguing is the same thing. The house is old, and my sister used her own money to renovate it and increase its value. There's no issue here. He turned to me. I'm sorry, he said earnestly. Then, turning back to Noel, he added, you need to apologize to her. Maybe you'll see where you went wrong. With tears in her eyes, Noel finally said, I'm sorry for causing such a commotion. Though there were many things I wanted to point out, I accepted her apology for the time being. I'm sorry too, my brother added. After that, my brother and his now calmed wife quietly left the house. Though the resolution was a bit forced, I was relieved to have protected the house I'd shared with my grandmother. As I watched them leave, I whispered to my grandmother in heaven, I got a little carried away and damaged your beloved house. Grandma, I'll fix it up until it's beautiful again, so please forgive me. I'll take care of it from now on. Thank you, Grandma. It felt like her spirit had heard me. My grandmother's photo, displayed in the house, seemed to smile ever so faintly. Eventually, Mark chose the path of divorce. He admitted that my observations about Noelle's attitude were true, and he realized it would be too difficult to continue living with her. She probably won't change, he confessed, hinting that maybe our grandmother had given him some wisdom. As for me, I rebuilt the house with my own hands. The repair costs were covered by my brother as an acknowledgement of the damage caused by his ex-wife's actions. A friend in construction joked. That was a bold move. Truth be told, I had always planned to renovate the living room walls someday, as I had never been fully satisfied with them. Despite the challenges, I was happy with the results. Moving forward, I intended to cherish the memories this house held and create new ones to build on.